Sure thing. Here's the asterisk. Asterisk full continuous narration. Asterisk version of your story. No headings, no cuts. Fully voiceover ready. Written in cinematic, emotionally immersive style, and structured for 8-12 minutes of retention. She walked into that courtroom with pride, representing justice and her people. But what happened next shattered every illusion of equality. A white officer sworn to uphold the law did the unthinkable, in front of everyone. Cameras rolling. No one dared to move. For a moment, time froze. And then Times did something no one expected. It wasn't just a reaction, it was a reckoning. Because sometimes, silence is the loudest scream for justice. What really happened that day, and why did the world try to bury it? Before that day, Sergeant Maya Thompson was more than a name, she was a symbol. A decorated black MP, known for her discipline, her calm under pressure, and the quiet strength that made even her toughest peers listen. She believed in the system she served. Believed that justice wasn't just a word written on courtroom walls. It was something you could stand for, fight for, protect. That morning, the courthouse felt like routine. The echo of boots on tile, the faint buzz of cameras outside, the hum of legal chatter in the air. She adjusted her uniform, polished and perfect, unaware that by the end of the day, it would be stained with something far darker than dust. People greeted her with nods of respect. Some smiled, some whispered, because even in a place built on fairness, her presence as a black woman in authority still drew eyes. She had learned to ignore it, to rise above it. But as she entered the courtroom, something in the air shifted. A tension she couldn't name. A silence that didn't feel respectful, just watchful. Moments later, she'd understand why. Because in that room where law was supposed to rule above prejudice, something else was waiting, something that would test everything she believed about justice, race, and power. The hearing began like any other. Lawyers whispered over stacks of papers, cameras flashed, and the judge's gavel cut through the noise. Maya stood tall beside the prosecution table, representing discipline and duty, a living reminder that integrity could wear a uniform too. But as she took her place, she felt that look. From across the room, Officer Daniels watched her. His smirk wasn't subtle. It was the kind that said he saw her not as a soldier or an equal, but as a woman who didn't belong where she stood. He had a reputation, known for his temper, for the complaints that somehow always disappeared. Maya knew his type, men who wore the badge but hid behind it when it came to accountability. Still, she stayed professional. She had faced worse and refused to let her guard down. Then came the breaking point. As testimony began, the judge asked both parties to step forward. Daniels, already irritated, muttered something under his breath, a word Maya had heard her entire life, the kind meant to shrink you down to nothing. The courtroom went still. The word hung in the air like a curse no one wanted to claim. Maya's jaw tightened. Every muscle in her body wanted to react, but she held her ground. Discipline, she told herself. Professionalism. That's what they expected, to stay calm while being disrespected. But Daniels wasn't finished. As she moved past him to hand the clerk a document, he shifted deliberately, shoulder checking her. It wasn't hard, but it was meant to humiliate, to remind her who he thought held the power. The murmurs in the room grew. Cameras caught it. The judge's eyes flickered, uncertain. Maya stood frozen for a moment, every ounce of her training battling the flood of emotion rising inside her. She could feel years of patience, every insult, every side glance, every dismissal colliding in that single heartbeat. Then came the moment that changed everything. As Maya turned to return to her place, Daniel sneered again and said something low, venomous, ending with a word that cut deeper than any wound. She didn't even remember moving, only the sound, the sharp crack of impact, gasps filling the room. The officer stumbled backward, disbelief written across his face. Cameras clicked. Reporters shouted. Maya's hands trembled, not from fear but from release. For a second, the world felt weightless. Then chaos erupted. Security rushed in. The judge yelled for order. And somewhere, beneath the noise, Maya heard the faint sound of someone whispering, "Good for her." But even as she stood surrounded by flashing lights and raised voices, she knew what came next. The headlines wouldn't tell the full story. They never did. In the span of a few seconds, a woman who had spent her life protecting the law had become its next target. And as the officers moved closer, she realized this fight wasn't over. It was only just beginning. The courtroom exploded into chaos. Cameras swarmed like vultures, flashing and feeding on the spectacle. The officer lay stunned, clutching his jaw, while Maya stood frozen not out of fear, but disbelief at what she'd done. Years of restraint, of holding her tongue, of swallowing every insult, all of it had erupted in a single, unstoppable moment. Security rushed her, shouting orders, their hands already on her shoulders. The same hands that once saluted her now pulled her back like she was a threat. She could hear their voices. Assault on an officer. Take her out. Each word hit harder than any shove, but it wasn't just the noise. It was the looks. The audience, once filled with quiet respect, now divided, some horrified, some stunned, and a few proud. She caught the eye of a young black girl sitting in the back row, clutching her mother's arm, her eyes wide with something Maya hadn't seen in years' hope. Outside the courtroom doors, reporters were already shouting questions, their cameras hungry for sound bites. Was it planned? Is she violent? Does this prove the system is broken? Every word twisted the truth, turning justice into spectacle. And as the cuffs clicked around her wrists, Maya realized the story was no longer hers to control. They would frame her as the aggressor, erase the provocation, rewrite the truth as they had so many times before. Still, she didn't lower her head. Her body shook, but her eyes stayed fixed forward. Because deep down, she knew something had shifted. The slap had been instinct, but the silence that followed was revolution. As they dragged her through the corridor, chants began to rise from outside. Faint at first, then louder, echoing through the marble halls. Her name, her story, her defiance. For the first time, Maya wasn't the only one standing up. And as the courtroom doors closed behind her, one thought burned brighter than the flashing lights. They could arrest her body, but they could never silence what she had just ignited. Days later, the footage spread across every screen in the nation. The slap, the silence, the chaos. But beneath the headlines and the outrage, the truth was harder to find. They called her a disgrace, a danger, a symbol of division. Yet for countless others, Maya became something different, a mirror, a reminder of what happens when respect is demanded but never returned. While officials debated proper conduct, communities gathered in the streets. Protesters held signs that read asterisk. Her silence spoke louder than the system. Asterisk. For the first time in her career, Maya wasn't standing guard. She was the one being defended. In the weeks that followed, she faced hearings, suspensions, and endless scrutiny. Every frame of that video was dissected, replayed, and judged. But beneath it all, something shifted in her. The uniform that once felt like armor now felt like a weight, a reminder of a promise she had kept, even when the system never did. Still, she refused to disappear. She spoke out, not in anger, but in truth, about what it meant to serve a country that didn't always serve you back, about what it costs to stay silent in the face of humiliation. And while the headlines eventually faded, her story didn't. It became part of a bigger conversation, one that couldn't be buried under bureaucracy or broken by fear. Because Maya's story wasn't just hers. It belonged to every person who has ever been told to stay calm, stay quiet, or stay in their place. And maybe that's the real question we're left with. How many more people have to break before the system does? Or are we brave enough to change at times before times the next Maya has to fight alone?